Welcome to our 5th webinar in our DE&I webinar series, all around how we can be more accessible and equitable in recruitment processes. Today we've got the amazing Corrine Brickman, Major and Ben Batten with us, and we're talking about how we can make recruitment processes more accessible and equitable and some practical steps to take. I'm actually going to come to Corrine first if you want to introduce yourself. Corrine is also part of our DE&I committee as well internally at SourceBreaker.
Yes. Hi, I'm Corrine. I'm a product manager at SourceBreaker, well, now Bullhorn. So I manage the development of our platform. And as a disabled employee, I'm very passionate about improving our platform to make it more accessible for all users. I had a stroke 5 years ago, and as a result, I'm partially sighted. It's like going through the recruitment process really made it clear to me that it isn't accessible, and it is a lot more difficult if you have a disability and you want to be open about it. It's not easy. It's not particularly easy feeling comfortable with knowing that you'll actually be taken seriously, knowing that you'll be seen as capable and not have your disability seen as baggage, or seen as you having to over accommodate for your disability and working extra hard rather than actually just having the accommodations needed for you to do your best. But as a result of that, it is really important to me to use our platform and also use my experience to try and help other people so that their experiences are better than mine, basically.
Amazing. Joe and Ben, I'm going to come to you next just for a bit of an introduction before we kind of look into what this means as well, and we look at what disability means. Joe, do you want to go first?
What do you mean, just introducing myself?
Introduction, yeah.
Right. Sorry, I was just processing some things there and writing down some notes. Every day is a school day, right? I just love some of the things that you highlighted there, Corrine. Thank you. So yeah, I'm Jo Major, founder of Diversity in Recruitment. My background is in recruitment industry, been in it for 23 years as a recruiter on desk, an L&D global sales trainer, and then moved into the ED&I space a few years ago. And I spend the majority of my time working with recruitment teams, leadership teams within the industry to help them understand ED&I in its relation to hiring and talent attraction, and to make what they do more inclusive, accessible and equitable.
Amazing. And Ben?
Thanks, Ellie. Yeah, hi, Ben Batten. I'm the founder of Eureka, which is a life science recruitment business. I've been in recruitment not quite as long as you, Joe, 21 years. And I've had the fortune, originally from Australia, I've worked in Asia for 12 years. I moved to the UK 4 years ago. And my passion for DE&I and I guess all of this probably came about 4 years ago when I moved to the UK, because it's so much more, I want to say in your face, but it's so much more important, so much more recognised here than it is in Asia. It's still very in its early stages there. And I think particularly going through COVID, just the different talent pools that, remote working, hybrid working has opened up. I think it's just so important for this to be an ongoing conversation that we're all looking at, what can we do as employers and as recruiters that are, linking these two skill sets together.
Yeah, and one of the things that I guess we're looking at today is how we can be more accessible and equitable for like the whole workforce. And when we look at disability, I think most people that are listening to this, you assume that someone's sat in a wheelchair and you think about how you can cater for them. But one of the things I think I wanted to demystify first of all in this conversation is actually what disability is and what that actually looks like. And definitely something we wanted to kind of touch on first of all before we even look at how we then start to accommodate for that. And Corrine, you've already talked a little bit about your experience and what disability looks like for you personally. So yeah, I just want to try and open that up to what is disability, what should people kind of be looking out for?
Disability doesn't have a particular look. It doesn't have disability. Even if you have someone that is, for example, I'm visually impaired. No two people with a visual impairment have the exact same experience. There are so many assumptions on, oh, well, I wear glasses, therefore that must be why I have visual impairment. That's nothing to do with it. I've actually got I had a stroke, and as a result I've got damage to my visual center in my brain. So my eyes are technically, like, other than being slightly short-sighted, they're perfectly healthy eyes. But the assumption, that like people immediately assume that it must be my eyes that cause my impairment. But it's the whole point, I guess, is what I'm saying is that it's removing the assumptions of, number one, the cause of someone's disability. Number two, what does that disability look like? It may be visible, it may not be visible, but instead of just immediately assuming, especially like not assuming that, for example, removing assumptions, but also actually asking questions and not just assuming what that person might need as an accommodation, and actually obviously asking in a tactful way. But yeah, when I first started my career, the first questions were, like, would special glasses fix it? Or, oh, so you must need a screen reader. Or, like, oh, why don't you get a guide dog? That will help. But instead of, making those assumptions, it would have been a lot more helpful for people to say, okay, so you're visually impaired. Is there anything that I can do to try and make things more accessible for you? But it's taken that time to ask those questions. And not just that, but also not making negative assumptions, and being open to there being more than what you're initially seeing. So for example, say if I bump into someone and it's not visually obvious that I am visually impaired, instead of just assuming that I'm being rude, actually being like, oh, maybe there's, maybe that person isn't intending to be rude or aggressive or, but yeah, there's often more that meets than, what's the word? There's more than meets the eye, if that's the right term. Quite literally in my case.
Is there anything, Joel, Ben, that you wanted to add to that at all?
I think there's some really good points that, Corrine, that you made there. And I think the first being, disability is in itself completely diverse and a completely different experience for everybody that classes themselves, sees themselves, defines themselves as having a disability. But the interest that, the spectrum is so broad. Yet from a very, very young age, we are fed one particular image of somebody with a disability. And, you mentioned it, you touched on it before, Ellie, whenever I'm in a training room and I'll say, right, I'm going to say the word disability, what comes to our minds first and foremost? Safe space. And everybody says the candidate in a wheelchair. And we really explore that and the reasons why we connect. And that's not, I'm not minimizing candidates who are wheelchair users in any way, but it's almost like our go-to place. And we look to, interestingly, Corrine, the way that other human beings immediately try to become problem solvers on things that they're not an expert in. Well, do I need to do this? Do I need to do this? Do I need to do this? And a long list of things that perhaps are also shrouded in microaggressions there as well, and assumptions and stereotyping. But, we with the best of intentions, we can exclude people or make people feel othered by trying to fill that space of conversation and offer solutions, especially as recruiters, right? Because that's what we're really inclined to do. And I think one of the for me, the big missing part of the jigsaw here is education from a really, really young age, in terms of actually what is disability, and trying to move us away from that stereotype, and to understand that, you know, disability is really broad and really unique to each individual person, and I guess, you know, as recruiters, we're not using these stereotypes that we've been taught from a young age, and we actually commit to educating ourselves, you know, at that absolute base level of understanding as to what disability could be, listening to the voices of people with disabilities, doing the reading, doing the research, following people on LinkedIn. I mean, you know, is a great space that we can learn from, like, every single day, and taking ourselves, just understanding the basics. Sometimes, sorry, I'm waffling on, aren't I? But understanding the basics, you know, looking at the, you know, what do we even mean when we talk about protected characteristics? What do we even mean when we talk about access to work? You know, what are some of the things that we could be doing?
Yeah. And when you open it up like that, and you start to look at all the different ways, even more than you can even think of, that would which would like be a disability more than maybe what you first initially think, and then you think about all the different ways that those people might experience it. You've then got a huge group of people who are, you know, in the workspace, that are looking for jobs, that are in the recruitment processes, that aren't being accommodated for. So what's the impact of not actually having an accessible recruitment process? If there's so many people that are going through these recruitment processes that aren't being catered for, I guess is my question, what's the actual impact of that from a candidate side, like from a personal side, and not actually also for recruitment businesses that aren't accommodating? Ben,
I'm creating space for Ben here.
Okay. So look, I think that the key thing here is just for both parties, really. It's not just the candidate, it's the client potentially missing out on a really, really good candidate. And if you think of you know, the types of disabilities that, you know, there's such a broad spectrum of them. In a lot of cases, you know, if somebody has an accident, for example, and has a, you know, physical disability, it hasn't impacted their, you know, what's up here. They can still do the same job that they could do before, but maybe that they can't walk anymore, or they have, you know, some other, you know, physical disability, but doesn't impair their thinking process, their thought process, their ability to do that. So I think that it really is, you know, missing out on those big pools, but it's looking at, you know, what, I guess, you know, as a segue from when we talk about what are the types of disabilities, but, you know, how are we making the process equitable and inclusive? So it might be that somebody physically can't get to a location for whatever reason, and are we creating a time and place where they're physically able to concentrate and focus on the interview? It could be that you know, that there's some testing components, and I think that this is really, really important, that we're asking some of the questions. You know, are there any things that, you know, would enable you to be more successful? So it's, you know, trying to turn it into a positive rather than a negative. You know, how can we make sure that you perform the best at, you know, at this assessment? Is there anything that you want us to be aware of? And it might just be, hey, I need accessibility tools on the computer that I'm going to use. And that could be the difference between succeeding or not succeeding. Yet it's just, you know, that minor thing which doesn't cost anything. If you think, most computers now have accessibility functions built in, it's just ticking a box. You know, I learned that firsthand in my last job, that we had somebody join that needed that, but was, you know, uncomfortable putting the hand up and saying, hey, this is something that I need. But it's, if you take away all of those barriers and say, okay, well, we've got, let's say, 5 people coming in for interview, have we given them equal opportunity? And that's, you know, it's the room, or it's the technology, it's the time. It might be that they need a 5-minute break in between time because they can't focus for as long, whatever those things might be. Then when you get to the end of it and you go, actually, well, we've got 5 amazing candidates. You know, you put, you know, we talk about unconscious bias in an interview. That can take a lot of different forms, but if you put it in a, you know, think of it as a physical disability, if you close your eyes and have treated everybody the same, you're then assessing everybody equally on their merits rather than thinking about some of the other things that might get in the way in the traditional thinking.
Yeah. And from I guess from the candidate side as well, if you're someone who isn't being accommodated for in, you know, when you're going for an interview, and then it happens again for your next interview, and then you get into that job, and then it happens for your next career move, and then each time you're kind of facing roadblocks that maybe other people don't face, I think that could have a real big impact on like your career progression, how easily it is for you to be able to move jobs, and the like the actual impact on a person and their ability and their confidence, I think would take a huge knock. And one of the things I think recruitment companies would need to think about is like, how can we make sure that we make everyone feel more confident in the recruitment process and their own ability? Are we asking the right questions? Jo, is there anything you wanted to add as well, sorry, on that around
that psychological safety piece? I think, I mean, look, ultimately, what we can't do, what we tend to do, and what I've done in the past is like, you know, announce to the world, right, okay, we're missing out on 20% of the working population here. We need to go and advertise on a job board that is going to attract candidates with disabilities, right? We need them in our talent pool. We need to improve our CV to interview ratios. We need to fill more jobs. We are missing out on a trick here. And ultimately that one methodology is never going to land. It's never going to have a return on its investment. We missed the step in between there, which was this psychological safety, this trust piece, right? The recruitment industry is notorious for a lack of trust from candidates, right? We've got research after research that shows us that people don't trust us, and, you know, large proportions of candidates decide not to work with us because of that reason. So we need to make sure that we are going on that journey to, first of all, look at our processes, look at what equity actually means for everybody, look at how we can level the playing field, how we can make sure what are the things we need to do to make sure that everybody can access our processes in a way that works for them. That is a lot of work, right? That is breaking down our one-size-fits-all processes and putting other things in place and being able to respond to whatever requests we might get from a candidate. We also need to think about our allyship. I think this is absolutely critical. What if I was to do my due diligence on a recruitment business that was advertising a job on, say, Evenbreak, for example? Would I be able to land on your website and immediately feel like I was expected? Right? Would I be able to land on your website and know that I was going to be respected when I speak to recruiters? Would I feel confident that when I ask for adjustments or accommodations, that the recruiter that I talk to at this level is going to understand what I mean and be able to approach that conversation in a way that respects me and makes me feel valued, doesn't other me, and doesn't fire loads of microaggressions at me? And we need to have a voice. You know, we need to be comfortable talking about inclusion and breaking down barriers and improving access to work and what actually supporting disabled candidates means to us. And it's all part of, you know, we put lots and lots of resources into building, you know, this corporate image of ourselves and selling ourselves to clients. But we also need to flip that, and I think we need to do some work on, right, what do we need to be saying? What do we need to be doing? How do we need to be being in order for people to even have the confidence to tell us that they need an adjustment? Because in my experience, it's at the end of a process when there's a job offer on the table that somebody will disclose. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I could have made this process so much easier for you. I can't believe I subjected you to so many stages. That assessment, that style of interview technique, I didn't give you the right preparation, and you just like, that interview must have been 4 times, 5 times harder for you than it was for the other person. And it's certainly when you have that, like when you find out that happens, that you're like, okay, we need to be doing more. Can't have that happening on our watch anymore. That makes sense.
You do bring up a good point, and we talked about this last week with Corrine about, you know, do candidates put this information on their CV? And, you know, I think, Corrine, you said that you didn't, and I would strongly agree with that, you know, a resume is a sales tool. Let's assess on merit and then let's do it later. But Joe, you're absolutely right. That needs to be a conversation that happens really, really early on. So is it, you know, before the first interview, you know, is there anything that we could be doing to make the interview process easier for you? And I think different companies will approach that in different ways, but yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, you could drag somebody through hell, they still get the job. I mean, you know, hats off, you've done a cracking job, but yeah, that conversation needs to happen really, really early on, just to make sure that, again, that we are laying the field for equal assessment.
Yeah, and you made a really good point as well about what it actually looks like and what recruiters or recruitment agencies, recruitment staffing firms, what people can do to make that process more enjoyable, make it more accessible. One of the things to talk about is actually ask a question on this webinar. You're not going to get a secret formula of like, oh, you have someone in your candidate pool who's disabled, this is what you need to do, because as we've said, everyone's going to be completely different. You need to ask a question, you need to ask what people need, you need to make that conversation as safe and as approachable as possible. Is there anything that recruiters can do that will help equip them for those conversations? Joe, you spoke a little bit around like education and making sure people are like knowledgeable and feel like they can feel more comfortable having those conversations.
I think first things first, I think people need to, a lot of recruiters that I speak to they've never had any Equality Act training. They don't understand the parts around adjustments. I would say a large proportion do not even know their legal obligation. And this goes for clients as well, right? Recruiters and hiring managers. They don't know what reasonable adjustments means under the Equality Act 2010. You know, they don't understand that they're not allowed to disclose to a client without formal permission from a candidate. And it's the absolute basics, right? You should not be running a recruitment business, in my opinion, if you're not equipping your recruiters with the ability to not break the law as an absolute starting point. So I'm coming at this from a compliance perspective, right? But from like a human perspective, I would be. People learn from listening to people's stories. It is very, very difficult when, for example, I have the privilege of somebody who's not disabled. When I was recruiting for 17 years, I have no frame of reference. I have nothing to compare to. It is impossible for me to see the barriers that people face every single day when looking for a job, unless I hear stories from other people and I start to really understand how my one-size-fits-all process is making what I do incredibly difficult for some people and stopping them from wanting to apply for my jobs and affecting my chances of ultimately, from a commercial perspective, making money and making a placement. So I would encourage recruitment businesses to get people into their organizations, to train them and educate them through storytelling. And I don't mean like, you know, people who are not disabled going in to talk about generic unconscious bias here, right? I'm talking about like listening to people, for example, because I was discussing him, you know, the other day. You only have to follow somebody like Jamie Shields to then understand the importance of making your online profile and all your online content completely accessible, because Jamie will talk about how the way that you're not doing will impact his experience. So it just as an example, I think people tend to want to change when they can humanize what the impact of what they're doing. Don't know if you'd add to that, Ben.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that you know, it's kind of it goes back to, you know, school, right? That when you hear, you know, you've just got somebody standing up the front telling you, but when you actually physically do something, or you get, you know, do the practical side of it, and I think that that's so true here. That you know, people sharing the stories, I really struggled because of this, or this is how it made me feel going through that. It humanizes the situation. And I think that, you know, that education's so important. You know, you talked about, you know, the reasonable adjustments, but it's recruiters play such an important part here. It's not just how we treat the candidates, but it's then making sure that our clients are equally equipped as well. You know, that they are making reasonable adjustments, but also that they have that awareness. And I think that there is a lot of ignorance is probably the right word, but it's also, you've kind of got to reach into the organisation. It's not just dealing with the talent acquisition person or the HR person that's potentially front facing this. It's do your hiring managers, do the people in that team, and yes, the reasonable adjustments, but it's also making sure that the questions they're asking are, not discriminatory or going to make the person feel worse as well, because, that turn of phrase can be equally damaging as, not making the adjustments as well. You could do all the good stuff there and then ask a really, unfair, unkind question and completely undo it.
Yeah. Sorry, just wanted to add to that. As much as we can make adjustments, I think an important thing is also leading by example. One thing I found when I was applying for jobs was, if I look at a company and I look at their, people, on the higher end of leadership, I very rarely would ever see someone that had a disability. It's, it's easy to say, oh yeah, we believe in accessibility, etc. But if I looked at a recruitment firm or looked at a company I wanted to apply for, and I actually saw someone, like visibly saw someone that, was in a senior position and had a disability, I'd actually be like, oh, okay, so, they lead by example. Like, I can actually see that instead of them saying like, oh yeah, we understand that disabilities exist, they actually empower people with disabilities in their company to go into leadership positions. I was hearing a talk by an advocate with a disability, and he was saying, like, when he's applying for jobs and looking at companies, like, if he can't see someone that's in a senior position that looks like him, whether it's someone with a disability or he's an Indian man, if he doesn't see someone else that's a person of color that's in a senior position, then how is he meant to know that he can strive to succeeding in his career and progressing in his career? There's no evidence of that. He's basically having to work towards a ceiling that he can't even see that is something he'll be able to do. So if I were, leading by example is so important. And also when we talk about disability, there's tends to be a lot of focus on physical disability, that it's more than just people with, no neurological conditions, but, have disabilities that are physical. It's also understanding, like, there is more to, like, it's not just like ticking the box of saying like, oh, I've got someone that's got, just needs adjustments that are, not just, but has adjustments that are easier in their opinion from what they've selected as being appropriate for them. It's, like, for example, with me, I have neurological fatigue. I have challenges with my memory. I have delay in terms of comprehension of what people have said. Sometimes I need someone to repeat themselves. Sometimes I need to just have some, like in a meeting, just have people slow down a bit so that I can process what they've said and also process what I'm about to say. And just having that understanding that just because, it doesn't have to just be a physical disability alone. And again, I don't mean just in terms of minimizing it. I'm saying that there is more to disability than I guess what meets the eye, or there's such a range. And it's not just choosing like being able to select what disability, as I said, seems the most convenient. But leading by example, I think, is so important. And I would love there to be a world where you actually can see, more people in leadership positions that have disabilities. So you can apply, and instead of it just being like, oh, we've got adjustments, it's actually like, oh, we actually have people that we see as capable.
It's almost like
company,
there's so many important points for reflection on what you just said then. I think that, there was a point at one time in the recruitment industry where there were so many charters and so many initiatives around disability, and yet we don't seem to have moved the dial. are working in an industry where very, very few people are open about their disabilities, whether it be neurological or whether it be physical. And it's still common to send a survey around, a diversity demographic survey around to your business, and the number coming back as 0, because there is, I think that what we've done is we want to attract. We've done the attraction piece with all the initiatives and the pledges and the sign-ups, but what we failed to do is create an environment within the recruitment industry that will accommodate, attract and retain disabled or neurodiverse recruiters, because we're still so rigid in how we recruit. Maybe we flex a bit, and maybe it's a bit more dynamic than it used to be. I know that hybrid working, flexible working spaces, you know, are very, very different sometimes walking around a sales floor to what it used to be, you know, several years ago when I recruited. I mean, one of small adjustments, empowering people to wear their earphones if they so wish, right? That was never a done thing. I mean, you had to go through so many hoops just to have your earphones in to minimize noise distraction and to focus, you know, and, you know, to people being able to take themselves away to a quiet space to work, or folks being able to work different types of hours that accommodate them. But I still don't think we are anywhere near people being vocal about some of the challenges that they may have faced or the barriers that they may have navigated in their careers. So this whole, you can't be what you can't see. When are we gonna, until we destigmatize, until we sort out stereotype, until we educate, until we recognize and admit that bias is out there loud and proud, I still don't think we'll be at a stage where anybody on that leadership team is talking. There are a few. I'm saying it's not something that's not happening, but it's just the ones. It's really funny, actually. It's the ones that are in real position of power and authority that are now, right, I've got here now. I call the shots so I feel comfortable talking, and then expect everybody else around them to be like, oh, can I talk about my disability? It doesn't happen, because that person's in a position of privilege, because they're in power and authority. They're being open and transparent and out about their identity isn't a threat to them anymore. But for those folks that are not there yet, I still think that we've got a lot of work to do in our culture across the board as an industry.
And one of the things that I think we're really quite keen for the people in the recruitment space that are listening to this is every person's responsibility to do their own education and to make sure that they are upskilled and knowledgeable on as much as they can be, so they feel confident and comfortable having these conversations. But also there are resources available to staffing agencies and recruitments to actually help make, and also just your clients, if you're speaking to a big client or a small client or whichever client you're speaking to, there are resources that companies can lean on that can actually help make these accessible and help make your recruitment process more accessible, and actually help that candidate's experience when they're in their role, and actually make sure that they are happy in their role, they're successful in their role, and potentially actually want to use you again as a recruiter. So I did kind of want to touch on that as well. And I know, Corrine, last week when we spoke, you spoke a little bit around some of those resources that you knew were, I'm really sorry about this light that keeps flicking on and off, but you know, yeah, just the kind of resources that are available to everyone, if kind of the circumstances are right. I don't know who wanted to pick that one up.
With Access for Work and other charities, there are many charities that can provide not just education but also funding for equipment that can help if that is required for employees with disabilities. I think a misunderstanding that a lot of employers have is that having a disabled employee will be very expensive, when actually adjustments, sometimes they don't cost anything, and sometimes if equipment is needed, it often you know, they don't have to contribute very much to that equipment, or if they do have to contribute towards that equipment, it's negligible. So it's doing research as well. It's just actually seeing instead of making assumptions, actually looking into it themselves, and reaching out to those resources to learn more.
Yeah, and I think that whether it's the employer or the recruiter, but I think if we start with the recruiter, because we're talking to the recruiter audience, fear drives a lot of this, I think, or perhaps being scared to ask questions. And I think that's a hard barrier to overcome, because people are always worried, am I going to offend this person? But I think if you come at it from a place of care and be empathetic, look, I don't really understand what that disability is, or I don't really understand what you said. How does that, please could you help me understand that a little bit more? I'm sure candidates will be very happy to share that with you. I mean, maybe they're not going to go into the nth degree of personal detail, but they might say, well, look, I'm not comfortable sharing. Well, you could go away and find out about it and then come back and talk to the candidate and say, hey, look, after that conversation, I went and read more. This is what I learned. And again, that makes people feel that you care. But we can't let that fear of being scared or saying the wrong thing get in the way. I mean, qualify it and say, look, I don't know, I don't understand, please help me, or please can you direct me? But then the follow through is equally important. If you go and do it and then let the person know, share with the team around you, we're all taking some ownership in, building up a collective knowledge to help people in the longer term. I think that's so important. And Corrine's absolutely right. It doesn't necessarily need to cost a lot of money. There are charities or there are organisations that support different disabilities. And if I can give one example, there's the Dyslexic Association will come in and do workplace assessments. And I've had that in the past for one of my team members. And the cost of that was negligible. And then the recommendations, it was turning on accessibility on Office 365. It was providing coloured post-it notes. It didn't cost us a lot of money at all, but the awareness and the significance of that person coming into the organisation and the changes we were able to make was so significant, because we started that right at the beginning, and it was something that should have been there from day one. It wasn't, but we learned from it and made the change. And unfortunately, we didn't find out till after the person had started, and fair play. But if we had known on day one, perhaps we could have dealt with some of those things, because it wouldn't have changed the decision to hire at all. But I understand perhaps the fear from the candidate side that drives. I don't want to let on that there's a limitation. So I think sharing, but equally recruiters taking on that duty to educate, to share, and people will feel so much better about it, because it'll show that to use your words, walking the walk.
Yeah, I mean, there's another thing though, is that I feel there's something nice as well about not necessarily having to for it to be a choice for you to disclose, rather than you having to sort of feeling like you're forced to, having a recruitment process where it's, I guess, already more friendly to disabled candidates, but you don't really have to, I mean, I know there will be some requirements sometimes in the process that would kind of maybe press someone to have to ask for adjustments. But if that's already taken into consideration more, that could help a lot more, where someone feels like it's a choice for them to ask for, for them to disclose their condition, rather than I have to do this. Someone feeling pressed to do so. So that's one of the things I was thinking about.
Such a good point. And if you are, I'm seeing more recruitment businesses go out there and tell the world that we are an inclusive, accessible and equitable recruitment business. And often, the adjustments and accommodations that you make for one group will automatically impact several different groups. And I think what you've just said then is a really, really important point. People should not have to feel like they need to disclose that parts of their identity in order for you to smash your one-size-fits-all recruitment process. And actually, if you are one of those recruiters who's doing the work to be more accessible and is understanding that the processes that we have at the moment create barriers, not just for people with disabilities, but millions and millions and millions of people that are deselecting themselves from processes that don't work for them, you know, every single day. And also another, I think, key point, picking up, I think, from what everybody said is, you know, what are we doing around our induction and onboarding process? You know, how are we actually, yes, people may not have wanted to disclose throughout the recruitment process, but they've joined us. You know, what are we doing around that first conversation in the first week around workplace inclusion? What do you need? You know, Corrine, you were mentioning several things that make your working environment work for you. You know, I need to sit down as your employer on day one, don't I, and say, right, okay, we want to make sure that everything works for you. We create a working environment where you can thrive and be successful, and it's a level playing field, and you've got access to everything that you need to make yourself successful and happy at work. Talk us through what that could look like. And there's a degree of being confident in your ability to be able to follow through with what that person might request. And I think that that's so powerful to have those conversations on day one or week one. And then we're not having, I've known people that have waited until the end of their 3-month or 6-month probation to disclose. And you're like, oh, how did you get through it? Not being able to have access to that. Absolutely devastating. And they've had to work 5 times harder, which is total lack of quality and equity, right? So I would always, anybody watching this who is responsible for developing in an onboarding or induction process, how do we have that safe conversation? Are we equipped and ready to respond? And also even something like, you know, when this is our training program, how do you access learning and development? As a trainer, I would always ask that. Does this process that we do fit? How can we make this work for you? So it's across everything: working environment, learning environment, social environment, absolutely everything that feeds into making sure that we're recognizing that what everybody needs is vastly different.
Yeah. And one of the oh, sorry, was someone gonna?
Sorry, just wanted to add to that. Really, yeah, really good point. I think another important aspect as well is when it comes to yeah, like, I guess attracting candidates and also keeping candidates. One thing I looked at a speech yesterday which really resonated with me was the conversation of when it comes to like requirements, when it comes to going into a job and applying for one, just when you're approaching candidates, being more understanding that they may not necessarily check every single box, especially when it comes to experience or gaps in employment. But yeah, I guess like just because someone doesn't have X number of years of experience doesn't mean that they're not necessarily just as capable of being in a senior position or being able to do that job. And yeah, like when someone goes into a job and joins a company, not necessarily just because they've only had 1 year of experience, not necessarily treating them as someone that is a junior, because they could have the skills of a senior. They just don't necessarily have 5 years of experience, but that could be because they were going through treatment or, you know, there are multiple reasons. But yeah, if you empower people when they join, not just treating them as the number of years of experience or the number of checkboxes that they checked during their application process, and judging them from their actual skills, I think that will help people a lot more when it comes to yeah, being able to express themselves, because they already know that not going in with the perception that they're not as capable, just because their CV said didn't tick every box, basically.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And I think if the recruitment companies all over the UK and all over the world start making processes more accessible, they feel more confident having the conversation, they feel more comfortable asking questions and being open and making the requirements that are necessary, or the accommodations that are necessary. What is actually the impact in the recruitment industry?
I think commercially there's more candidates that you can place. That's probably the easy one. But I think it's that as an industry, we are viewed as being very, very transactional. It's just bums on seats. Who's got the dollar or pound sign above them? What's the easiest placement? And I think that it's just thinking about how can you build a long-term sustainable recruitment business. What are the drivers that are important? Yes, placing people is important, but it's building meaningful relationships and connections with people, and that comes from showing empathy, from showing that you're proactive and that you do what you say you're going to do. And I think that when you think about recruitment processes, if you've invested time and effort with somebody, and you've gone that extra mile, they're going to be more loyal and committed to you. And you may not place them. We don't place every candidate, even with the best of intentions, but they're going to go out and say, look, Ben was amazing because he listened, he cared, and he really, really tried to help me and went the extra mile. And that in the long term will add so much more returns back to your business, because you'll get referrals. You may even have that person come back later. But I think that's that genuine investment, that sincerity, that empathy is plus there's the feel good factor as well, right? Yes, we all want to make money and be successful and be able to afford things, but if you feel good that you're making a change, making a difference, I think that's equally, if not more important than the financial aspect.
100%. Yeah, go on, Joe.
No, I was just that mindset is where we need to be. That's what we need to aspire to. I'd love to see transactional recruitment just being a thing of the past. Suits some industries, but I also think it can be a massive blocker to talent. And I think if we want to continue being a true talent partner, which is what a lot of us class ourselves as, we need to be thinking about this stuff, because it's going to be a non-negotiable in a few years. It's just going to be, can you do this, 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 and this? Show us your receipts, evidence everything. Great, you can take on a job for us. And I think if you can't, I think you're gonna feel the impact of that. And and if you are a transactional recruitment business, in terms of your candidate loyalty and your candidate pool, the more and more businesses who take on that, are more socially aware, make people think about, center their work around the candidate journey, that's where talent's going to gravitate to, especially the type of talent that are currently underrepresented and we're fighting for their attention at the moment. So yes, so much Ben, that's for me, that mindset's everything.
Corrine, is there anything you wanted to add at all to?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I mean, one thing I found when applying for my current position, in terms of requirements and my number of years of experience, I went into, technically with the number of years of my experience, I should have gone for a more junior role. Whereas when it came to interviewing and getting to know me, it was obvious, and I guess I'm being big-headed, but it was obvious that I could do a role that was definitely a lot more than junior, and that I could take on leadership and ownership of development of our platform. But it took actually being open to talking to me and getting to know me more, where had they just had our internal recruitment not made the effort to have that conversation, they would have never known about me, and I wouldn't actually be doing my current position. And I'm very comfortable and very confident in what I do. It's just taking that time to be open to candidates that don't necessarily tick those boxes, but when you do, you can end up having someone recruiting someone that is great for their role and progress as well, and then that company could want to go and use that recruiter again, because they're like, oh well, you've been bringing really great talent. So yeah, it can benefit recruiters because they'll keep on getting more work.
I think, Joe, this goes right back to the point you made earlier around, right at the beginning, how and I'm exactly the same. If I'm not around people who have those experiences, we learn by the stories, we learn by listening to people, we learn by meeting new people, and the more people that are around us that are different to us, that have different abilities, that have, that have different backgrounds and different stories, the more educated we are, and the better we can consult our clients, I think, as well, or actually have those conversations. So Corrine made a really good point that, we're building better teams by having more accessible recruitment processes. And I think is super important as well. And that being able to take that and transfer those skills and those conversations to be more consultative rather than more transactional. I think the impact of that is pretty significant. Is there any kind of final thoughts, takeaways, anyone wanted to share before we?
I just wanted to say, look, there's so many experienced and outstanding independents out there who have lived experience and understand multiple different other people's lived experience, that are experts in coming into organisations and support, educating, creating awareness, creating accountability, giving recruitment businesses the tools. I honestly think that, there needs to be that investment. You can't expect to really have the tools to be able to do all of this stuff without bringing in somebody. And I'm not talking about bringing in somebody who looks at generic. I'm like, the education piece needs to be done with somebody with lived experience, but also a broad understanding of other lived experiences. Instead of sometimes I always look at it could be instant, just bypass a client drinks event that you're about to spend 10k on and bring in some people to educate your recruiters, and you'll see the return on the investment a lot more than you will do getting your clients pissed. That's my final parting words.
Ben, is there anything else you wanted to add?
I would just add that ultimately what we're looking for is to get the best people into to our clients or working for ourselves, right? But I think it's we're also wanting to make sure that people succeed once they start. So a lot of what we're talking about is, are we, not only are we creating the environment in the interview and the hiring process, but when somebody hits desk day one, have we created an environment where they're set up for success? Because if we can get them through that, and again, thinking as recruiters, we've got replacement guarantees and stuff, right? You want people to get through that and stay long term. We've got to make sure that we've done all the groundwork early on to make sure that happens.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. Really, really good point. Corrine?
Yeah, it's just I think the key thing is education, removing the barriers of misinformation, the anxiety around as said before, fear of getting things wrong, but there are a lot of candidates out there that don't necessarily tick every single box that is expected to be what would actually be a successful person when it comes to actually doing the job. And the more recruiters, companies understand that, the more talent that they're going to be bringing in, and as a result, the more success they'll be having, because there are a lot of people out there that are really skilled and just aren't getting the chance to succeed. But it's literally just utilizing talent, and the more education we have, the better we can do.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for joining the conversation today, and Corrine, a special thank you to you for being so vulnerable, open, and sharing your story, because I think it's been really powerful, and I massively appreciate it, because I know it's not an easy thing to do. We will link people like Jamie Shields and some resources below the webinar, so you can all access them.
Just share these. Can I plug these 2 books?
Absolutely.
And the person behind them. Sorry, these books as a recruiter. These 2 books actually got me on my journey, and so did Jane Hatton. I don't know if you're familiar with these. A dozen great ways to recruit disabled people. A dozen brilliant reasons to hire disabled people. So basic and so bite-sized, but so impactful, and Jane's incredible.
Right, we will be linking those books down at the bottom as well.
Shameless plug to Jane's book, but yeah, brilliant for me.
The key thing we spoke about today is education is important. So one of the biggest questions people ask is where to start. So we want to put some resources at the below this webinar just to point you in a direction of where to start, and then kind of go from there. Thank you so much, and I will see everyone on the next webinar.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.